My name is Rhona Murray and I work for Ancestry, and I'm joined by my colleague Joe Buggy, who works for Ancestry ProGenealogists, all coming under the one umbrella of the Ancestry company. Today we're going to talk to you about Irish Catholic Parish records that are found on the Ancestry website. So to get started, I thought I'd kind of go back to the basics just slightly and help you get to grips with what we define as being a Catholic parish record. So within the Catholic Parish Records collection, what we were talking about mostly is the sacramental records. And by that I mean baptisms, confirmation, marriages and burials. An opportunity to get a log of somebody's life as they interact with the Catholic Church over their years. It's mainly, it's the backbone of any family tree in terms of tracing people at major events throughout their life as they interacted with the Church. In terms of when should you use them, the Catholic parish records are helpful when you're trying to go beyond civil registration. So from a Catholic perspective, civil registration would have begun for us in 1864. So from 1864 onwards, up until present day, if you go to sort of irishgenealogy.ie, you can get quite modern records for birth, marriage and death records from a civil perspective, where the state is in charge of recording such events. But prior to that, you're relying on the Catholic Church, and indeed the Church of Ireland, to record such events, major events in people's lives. In terms of what years they cover, there are some records that exist from 1740s onwards, but the majority of the records you'll see come into play from 1800s and 1820s onwards, and that is in relation to Catholic emancipation. Catholic priests weren't necessarily comfortable in recording such information prior to that point. So where, kind of alleviances were made in relation to some of the strict laws and rules around Catholicism and the practice of such. 1820s, you're sort of talking, the priests then felt more comfortable in being able to actually start to record details around their congregation in terms of baptisms, marriages, confirmations and burials. I'm going to now talk about the Catholic parish records that you can find on the Ancestry website itself. Many of you may not be aware, but Ancestry actually has the world's largest online offering of Irish Catholic parish records when it comes to both images and indexes combinations. They come from multiple sources, and it's something that we've been working on for a number of years. But the most recent tranche that really bumped up the numbers are in relation to the collection that come from the National Library of Ireland. So in July 2015, the National Library of Ireland did an absolute Trojan amount of work around launching the images, 373,000 images of Catholic parish records. Now they were available to browse. That was the capacity at which they could run that project, and they did a very good job. And at that point then, Ancestry were poised to take on the mammoth task of creating an index to those images, so that you can have your Google type search of going in and searching your own family surname and your parish location and being able to find details on that. So we launched with a bang in March 2016. We had RTE coverage, we had Irish Times newspapers writing about us, as well as Who Do You Think You Are magazine, and it went global in terms of what we achieved. There are 26 million names within this collection. It's absolutely huge, and it's fundamental to researching your Irish family history. So as I said, 26 million names from 10 million sacramental records. So within a baptism, you're likely to find 3 names in terms of the child and both parents' names, all of which are searchable. And Joe is going to talk about giving you some tips on how to get into the records in detail in a few minutes. The collection on Ancestry is called, the top line there, Ireland Catholic Parish Registers 1655 to 1915. The earlier ones of 1655 are actually death records from about the 1740s that capture ages from which you can then assume birth years of the 1600s. The majority of the collection are baptisms and marriages. The burial records that come into play are mostly for Northern Ireland, and by that I don't mean our current definition of Northern Ireland, but what I mean is the northern part of the island of Ireland. They cover the full 32 counties of Ireland, and you've got over 1,000 Roman Catholic parish records covered within the collection. That's over 95% of every Catholic parish in Ireland is covered. So if you're having trouble researching your family history beyond civil registration, and of course we know that census records pre-1901 are tricky, this is the collection you need to get into to populate your family tree kind of pre-1900. There's 3,507 registers that were digitised by the National Library of Ireland, and the majority of the collections stop in 1881. Reason being, civil registration began in 1864, and the National Library undertook the project to digitise these parish records in 1950s, 1960s. They decided to add on a 15-year period to that civil registration start date to capture people at a point that it was not compulsory to register your birth, marriage and death records. So that is the reason being that the majority of the records stop in 1881. In the last sort of 20 to 30 years, as I understand it, work was done by the National Library team to go back and capture parishes that would not participate in the original project, and therefore some of those parish years come all the way up into 1915. So you'll get some more recent records where they went back and did updates to fill the gaps. In addition to the National Library collection, before I touch on that, I'll give you an example of what it looks like just from a brief image perspective. And as I mentioned, Joe will go into detail on this. This is it's actually a baptism of my great-granduncle, Christopher Poole, the 17th of December, 1875. But the reason for showing you this image is to just set your expectations in relation to the format. So in 1950s, 1960s, the National Library created microfilm of the parish records. And it's this microfilm that was then taken and created a digital image from it. So therefore, you're looking at a black and white image, and the master files were used by users coming into the library over the years and searching them. So some damage has been done to the microfilm. The images have only been created in the last sort of 10 years. So you can see sort of blurred edges and unfortunately not as clear as if you're working with the original register itself. But with that in mind, it's a huge achievement for them to actually have been able to publish them online. So I think kudos there for all the work that they've done around it. This is actually an image that I got from Ancestry and showing my great-granduncle Christopher Poole, just kind of showing you how you can go and find a name and the date and a place. And I got a hint from an Ancestry member tree of a photograph of Christopher Poole that I never seen before. So being able to share that with my granny was really nice. We have existing databases on Ancestry as well, which is how we can say that we have the largest collection of Irish Catholic parish records. These have been online, some of them since 2013, some since 2014, so predating the record collection we launched in March that I've just spoken about. They are a combination of baptisms, marriages, confirmations, burials. These cover 19 counties across Ireland. So what we've previously seen covered the full 32 counties. I'll read out the 19 counties so that you're aware. We've got Armagh, Carlow, Clare, Cork, Donegal, Dublin, Galway, Kildare, Laois, Limerick, Londonderry, Louth, Mayo, Meath, Sligo, Tipperary, Tyrone, Westmeath and Wicklow. So a substantial number of counties from a private collector from which we got additional Catholic parish records. These range all the way up until 1912. So unlike the National Library project, these ones were done in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. Actually, probably in 2012 or in around that period. And a 100-year cut-off point was applied. So therefore, the records in these collections come up until 1912. So for those other counties that you're searching, you may see a gap that they only stop in 1881 in the previous collection, but by digging into some of the other databases we've got, you'll be able to take your family further. The great thing about this collection is that they're actually scanned from the original records. So you're getting a colour image, very clear, very high quality, seeing the original handwriting, and being able to zoom into quite full capacity to actually read the records, unlike the microfilm that an image was created from. So I'm going to briefly take you through the type of information you're going to see across the sacramental records, and then Joe's going to step in and give you some really good examples from a ProGen perspective over the research that he's done himself, and show you how to actually find the collection and do some work around it. So within a baptismal record, what do we get? We've got the first name, the surname. Date of birth can sometimes be recorded, as well as the date of baptism. The place of baptism, so you're getting the family parish name and the county that it falls into, as well as the father's name and the mother's name. This is an example from the second collection I referred to with the coloured images. This is Westland Row, and the second last line down the bottom is Porrick Henry Pearce, or in this case Patrick Henry Pearce as it's recorded, the 10th of November. I can't see the year. 1879. So Westland Row in Dublin. From a confirmation record perspective, you'll get the name, the date of the confirmation, the age of the child as well, which is very helpful to indicating the birth year and which you should be looking, as well as the baptismal record. The place of confirmation in terms of the parish. And again, I have seen on occasion where father's name and mother's name have been recorded. I must warn you though, in some parishes they did just like to put a list of the children's names, and you don't always get the age and the parent's name associated. So it does vary, but this is quite a good example in terms of the amount of information you can possibly see. Then we'll skip on to a marriage record example. Again, you can see the image straight away being the black and white microfilm, but this is from the National Library collection. You've got the name of the spouse who's getting married, the date of marriage, the place of marriage. But more importantly, you've got, well, perhaps equally importantly, you've got the father's name and the mother's name of the bride, as well as the father's name and the mother's name of the husband. So in that sense, you're getting a full family unit there. And just confirming that you're looking at the right person when you're tracing your family history, which, you know, we all like to do cross-reference and triangulate our research to prove that you've got the right person. The burial records are perhaps the least informative, and as I mentioned, more heavily recorded for the northern half of the island. You've got the name, the date of death. Age is very helpful to be able to count backwards. The place of death, and sometimes you do also have the churchyard location if you're interested in visiting the gravesite. These ones come from the Catholic Parish Records found on the National Library of Ireland. I'm going to hand over to Joe now, who's going to give you sort of an interactive talk in relation to doing some searches, and then showing you some live images and examples that he's uncovered in his research.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rhona. And just before I start on my particular section, I'd just like to point out, say from a research point of view, why it's so useful to understand the provenance of record sets that we find online and where they come from initially, because more and more records are coming online. Ancestry obviously has many different types of collections, but it's crucially important when you do genealogical research to understand what was the original format of the record set and then how they were created and put online, because that can allow us to understand then that, you know, maybe why we can't find ancestors in them, or if there's any potential gaps, or what is the most useful information that we can get. So the discussion that we just had there gives you that real deep understanding of the variation of databases that do exist and what you can actually then find in them. So as Rhona was saying then, we have many different Catholic Parish Register databases on Ancestry, and I'm going to focus on our core collection, which, as Rhona referred to, came from our partnership with National Library of Ireland. So when you log on to your Ancestry account, one of the fundamental places that I always recommend for people to start is if you select the search button at the top and then go all the way down to the card catalogue. So the card catalogue on Ancestry is essentially our list of databases, our list of the different types of record collections that we have. So there are tens of thousands of different types of record collections on Ancestry, and by starting from the card catalogue, that will allow you to select particular databases from particular countries and particular time periods. so that you can really hone in on the type of research that you want to do. So, for example, when we select the card catalogue then, there is a title search and a keyword search on the left-hand side. So you can see then in this particular search example, the word Catholic has been entered into the keyword search box. And what that does then is it brings up all the relevant databases then that are associated with records to do with the word Catholic. So not only do we have the primary database then at the top, Irish Catholic Parish Registers, that contain the 26 million names, but we have many other interesting and relevant record sets then from the Ancestry website that you can also use when searching for Catholic ancestors in Ireland. So this is the database then on the Ancestry website, and there are two primary ways then that you can search in this particular collection. So what most of you will be, I'm sure, familiar with is the search functionality on the left-hand side, where you can enter that key information in relation to the ancestors that you're looking for. So obviously their name, any particular year of birth that you are familiar with, or marriage or death, and then locational information as well. And then there's also the facility towards the bottom of the page to enter information in relation to some of the family members. So say, for example, for a baptism, you might know of the parents' names, and you might want to include those parents' names then as well to help filter your search results. What I would personally always recommend is not to get too specific with your search functionality. I typically recommend that people don't do exact searches, that they do kind of broader searches, because there's many different quirks and peculiarities of the Roman Catholic Parish Registers, particularly when it comes to the handwriting of the priests and how they might have spelled family names and first names. So for example, my second name is Buggy. It's typically spelled B-U-G-G-Y, but you will see variations in the registers ending in E-Y or I-E. So if you use that broader search functionality, you would capture all of the variations of those particular names. And just because you record your name today a certain way, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it was recorded maybe 100 or 120 years ago. The second way that you can search the record collection then is here through the browse functionality on the right-hand side. So again, you might know of an event that occurred maybe in a particular decade, or you might just have a particular parish. So it might be useful then to browse through the collection page by page and to pull out then the relevant entries that you are interested in. And this can be very useful, for example, with Catholic families that may have had 8, 10, or maybe even 12 births, and those would have all been registered in the collection. So, browsing a wide range of years then can ensure that you find all the relevant entries that you're interested in. So, for example, you would select the Roman Catholic Diocese first. There are some very good maps available online of Catholic dioceses. For example, the Catholic Bishops' Conference website has a very good diocesan map, and also Wikipedia as well also has some very good diocesan maps. So if I selected the parish from where I'm from, which is in the Diocese of Kildare and Loughlin, and then I get to be able to filter down to Paulstown, which is just here. And then when I select the parishes then, it gives me the options of the different year ranges that are available, because often you will find it wasn't just one book or one volume that was kept in a parish. There was a whole series covering the different types of records and covering the different years then as well, because it wasn't just the one priest who was in a parish over 100 and 150 years. You had different priests, and they would have kept different types of registers. So you have the search functionality on the left by the keywords and the dates, and then also the browse functionality as well. And there are many other databases then as well where the browse functionality is applicable on the Ancestry site. So I would always recommend that you consider that search option as well. Okay, so moving on then, so we're just going to get into a little bit more detail about the records, try and give you maybe some hints and tips, and then also maybe pick out some specific case studies then as well. So I've created what I call some heat maps here. So what's very important to understand is the start date of the registers, and also to understand then how that might play out in different counties in Ireland. So there's a couple of broad kind of rules that we can follow when it comes to the start dates of the registers. So typically we can say that as we move from the west of Ireland to the east of Ireland, the start dates of the registers are earlier and earlier. And broadly we can say then as well that in urban areas the registers will start earlier than in rural areas. So I picked out two counties here. On the left we can see County Kilkenny, and on the right we can see County Clare. So basically the brighter the colour, so the reds and the oranges, means that the registers in those parishes started at an earlier date. So if we look on the left-hand side, we can see that for red, that means the parish register started before 1800. So just contrast Kilkenny with County Clare. There's no parishes in County Clare where registers begin before 1800. And if we look at the blue colour, which means that registers started after 1850, we can see that in a western seaboard county, we have many more registers then that begin after 1850. So it's important to remember this kind of idea that when we go looking for research and looking to do research in particular counties, that we may be hamstrung by the starting point of the registers. But what is important to remember that if you have a particular parish that maybe doesn't go back as far as the time period that you're looking for, is to look at the neighbouring parishes. Because the evolution of the parish system in 19th century Ireland followed the population movements. So as populations changed and as areas of expansion emerged, new parishes were created. So if you look at the very northern part of County Kilkenny, we can see a small parish there in blue, indicating it's post-1850. So that is the parish of Muckalee. But we can see immediately below it then, the parish register starts earlier. So originally that was one parish, and then after 1850, another parish was created because there was the population to have a church and to have services and to record baptisms and registers. So if you're looking in a particular county and you find the register for that parish doesn't start as early as you want, look at the start dates of all the parishes around it, and you might find your people of interest then in that particular parish. So there are some other important people then to consider as well when we look at particularly the baptism and the marriage registers. That we have the core family unit, typically for a baptism of the two parents and the child being baptised, or of the marrying parties. But we also have the baptismal sponsors and we have the witnesses to the marriages as well. So typically we'll see two people listed for baptismal sponsors or marriage witnesses, but sometimes it can be just one person, and sometimes I've seen examples of three people as well. So these can be really, really useful because oftentimes these are the close people in that family's life. They are friends, they are neighbours, they are extended family members. And sometimes when we're doing our research, we get a little bit too focused on the family and the direct line that we are searching. So we really have to consider their extended family members, their friends and their neighbours, kind of that community research, because that could be the breakthrough that we're looking for on a collateral line that can help us to go back maybe one generation or maybe even more. And for those of you who are doing research outside of Ireland as well, this focus on the baptismal sponsors and also on the marriage witnesses can be very, very useful as well, because a huge feature of emigration from Ireland was chain migration, people following their friends and neighbours to different parts of the US, Canada, Australia and England. And what's very interesting is that the cluster of surnames in Irish areas that you find in New York State or California or New South Wales, you can see those same family names repeated in the parish registers. So the Murphys are standing for the Kellys as baptismal sponsors, and the Ryans are acting as marriage witnesses for the Brennan's daughter's marriage. We see these names replicated in emigrant countries as well. So don't forget the baptismal sponsors and the marriage witnesses. So I'm just going to highlight maybe some of the interesting things I've noticed. I worked in these registers every single day, and when you're looking at pages and pages of Catholic parish registers, you kind of begin to notice kind of unusual things that are interesting for research. So this is a particular example from County Clare. It's a Latin baptismal register from 1855. But what we can see here is a gap in the register from about the 11th of July through to the 28th of August. And we have the simple notation of entries lost. And it's an important thing to remember as well that sometimes we have our modern eyes and our modern way of thinking, that we're so focused today that all of our personal information has to be absolutely correct. But what we might forget is that maybe a baptism may not have occurred in the church. The priest might be recalling from memory. He may have been writing it down on scraps of paper with the intention of later transferring it into the register. So here we can see an example that for whatever reason, in that month and a half, the entries were lost. Maybe he lost a scrap of paper, maybe the priest died. But it might be unfortunate for you that maybe that's when a baptism occurred and that's why you can't find it. So you do see these kind of quirks of the entries, interesting notations when you work in these registers a lot. Here's another very interesting example then from a register in County Mayo. So the rules and regulations of the Catholic Church has changed over the centuries. And in the early 1900s, a decree called Ne Temere came in. And one of the aspects of that particular ruling was that when marriages occurred in Roman Catholic churches, the entry had to be recorded in the baptism register in the parish where that person was baptized. So that was a noble intention, but if you think about the reality of it, it could be quite difficult. That if somebody from Ireland emigrated to the United States or Canada, it would be very difficult to send word back to put a marriage in a baptism register in a particular part of Ireland. But we see many examples of this in baptismal registers in the Roman Catholic Parish Register collection. So here's one very interesting example. It's from the 13th of February, 1870. Mary Barrett, who was the daughter of Richard and Peg Murphy from Cross Townland in Kilmore Erris Parish then in County Mayo. So a notation then has been written above her entry, married John Higgins, 27th of June, 1928 in St. Paul's Cathedral, Pittsburgh, USA. So that's really, really interesting information, and especially maybe, let's say for example this was a sibling of one of your direct line ancestors and you know she didn't marry in Ireland, you never found out what happened, and here is direct evidence then that this person emigrated to the United States and married in Pennsylvania. So as I said, it's not the case maybe that every single marriage was referred back to and recorded in the baptismal registers, but because of the Ne Temere ruling then in 1908, I've seen a number of examples of this. And if you think about it, if somebody emigrated and maybe got married in their 40s or their 50s or even in their 60s in the United States or Canada or elsewhere, their baptismal entry in theory could be as far back as the 1850s, and you may just get that notation then above their baptismal entry indicating about their marriage. So some really, really good genealogical information in this particular example. So I'm just going to focus on a little case study then as well, again to show about how when you're looking through the registers to not just focus on one particular person and to consider the family unit as a whole. So I was recently doing some research and I was focusing on a person called James Coy, and we knew that James was from County Galway, but we wanted to find out exactly where this particular person was from. So we knew that broadly James was born about 1859, and luckily we had their parents' names from a death certificate from the United States, parents named James Coy and Sarah Donoghue. So Coy is obviously not a Kelly, it's not a Ryan, it's not one of the super common Irish names. So we kind of look at some of the surname study tools that we have and kind of try and pick out maybe some particular parts of Galway where these names might be evident. So we went looking for James then in the Roman Catholic Parish Registers in County Galway, and we couldn't seem to find them. So we used the broad search parameters and we came up with three interesting hits. There was a James Keogh, 1863, Jacobus Coy, because obviously a lot of the registers, particularly in Irish-speaking or more rural areas, might be in Latin. And that was 1861, and a Jacobus Keogh in 1860. But as you can see, none of the parents' names then here on the relatives on the right-hand side, none of them are James Coy and Sarah Donoghue. So we're frustrated. We can't find the exact person that we're looking for. But since we know the parents, what we can try and do is searching by the parents' names. So we weren't able to find where James was born, but typically families had more than one child, so there might be a good chance then that we could find siblings of James recorded in the registers. So when we searched then in County Galway, just focusing on parents' names, James and Sarah, we found two really interesting entries. So in Ardrahan, Roman Catholic Parish then, there was Patricius Coy, so Latin for Patrick, and then Brigida, from 1869. So we can see the entries then here, Patricius Coy from November, and then the parents' names. And luckily then we also get the townland as well, so Caherduff in Ardrahan, Roman Catholic Parish, County Galway. So we have two siblings of James here, and we're still wondering why is it that we can't find James. So I did a browse search, I went page by page, looking at all the Coy entries. I was mindful then of any maybe very unusual or very, very different spelling variations. Maybe it was McCoy, MC, MAC, maybe it was COY without the E, but we couldn't find any example then of James. But we were quite satisfied that this was the correct family, that we had parents' names matching, the time period was relevant, and based on our surname analysis, this matched up with one of the relevant Roman Catholic parishes. But when we look at the start of each of the microfilms then, or each of the registers in the collection, we see that there's a gap in the baptismal registers. So we can see that the first book goes from 1839 through to 1946, but then we have a gap of 20 years. So this is most likely then why we couldn't find James Coy's baptism. We believe he was born about 1859, but unfortunately it fell within the gap then from where they had either lost the register or for some reason the baptisms weren't recorded. But luckily then, as I said, we were able to find evidence of his siblings. And as genealogists, we like to have follow the genealogical proof standard, but one of the aspects of the genealogical proof standard is the reasonably exhaustible search. So we felt at this stage we had done a very, very exhaustive search. We had looked at all the registers, we had found relevant parents, we had found 2 siblings, and we felt then that this was the correct family in Caherduff townland in Ardrahan Roman Catholic Parish. So that's an example then of how it's useful to sometimes focus on the parents, especially when we're looking for baptisms. And as I said then, in the search functionality on Ancestry, you can enter parents' names only and maybe focus on a county or a parish or a particular time period. So just as I'm finishing up then, as I said, I'm kind of working in these registers every single day, and you really find some very interesting little notations. We saw a really great example from the Scottish speaker previously of someone doing the drawings on the census document. But here we can see a register then from Athlone in County Westmeath in 1815. And somebody has written at the bottom, 6 long months, after a while we shall meet. So I thought this was a really tender entry, and it's very, very curious as to who wrote this. What would be quite surprising is if it was the Roman Catholic priest who wrote it, and who is he maybe longing for? But possibly it was a later entry. It doesn't seem to be maybe the same handwriting or maybe the same depth of pencilmanship for the registers that were entered in 1815. But it's curious to consider and ponder this fact that who was kind of bored in their job, wasn't paying attention maybe, was thinking about their loved one and decided to enter this particular example in the register. And thank you very much.